Hey, it's Jess, and welcome to Becoming Heartstrong. I'm a social entrepreneur, speaker, mother, and business owner, and I'm here because I believe in you, and I want you to live your full potential. My mission with this podcast is simple: to offer you perspectives, tools, and inspiration to help you live with more courage, rebuild after setbacks, and strengthen yourself from the inside out. So each week, I talk to thought leaders, authors, experts, and everyday amazing people who share their stories and outlooks that help you get from where you are today to where you want to be tomorrow. Let's get started. Do you ever feel like you have something great inside of you, but you just aren't sure how to bring it to life? Do you ever need some clarity on how to get from where you are to where you want to be? I'm so excited to share a free guide I created just for you. This tool has helped me in my own times of struggle and doubt. It's called Your Future Self Guide. This mini course includes a future self visualization I recorded, a series of journal questions, and some insights from me about overcoming self-doubt and embracing self-leadership. You can download it for free at jessicalindberg.com/futureself. That's jessicalindberg.com/futureself. Let's get back to the show. On today's podcast, we're going to talk about grief and love, and about taking our deepest pain and making an impact in the world around us. Honestly, like my favorite topic. And we're going to talk about the important and sensitive topic of suicide. Leslie Weirich is a prominent advocate for suicide prevention, and she is my guest today. Her commitment to mental health support is deeply personal, having been greatly affected by the loss of her son Austin to suicide in 2016. Through her role as a suicide prevention specialist at Oaklawn Community Mental Health and a national speaker, she shares her family's story to inspire resilience and to provide practical tools for those impacted by similar experiences. Her greatest passion is for young men's mental health, which I'm really looking forward to talking to as a mom of boys, including student athletes and active duty soldiers. Leslie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jessica. It's my honor to be here today to spend some time with you and tell you a little bit more about our story. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, the work you're doing is so important. I had the chance to read Austin's story, and it really struck a chord with me because I have my two middle boys are high achievers, and they're both athletes, and they want to be college athletes. And after I read your story, I went up to my son Chase and I said, I just want you to know that we love you for who you are, not what you do. And I was like, I need to focus on that. You inspired me to do that. So I would love to start the conversation about Austin and talk about that knock on the door that you received in September 10th of 2016 in the middle of the night, and how the work called you that you're doing now that evening.
Well, that evening, that was, let me back up a little bit. So my husband, we're people of faith. So every morning my husband would text a scripture verse to each of our kids and, just a little message. And that morning it was about hope. Romans 15:13. It was about hope. And he said, Austin, I hope you have a hope-filled day. Love, Dad. Mm-hmm. And a few minutes later, Austin texted him back and he said, thanks, Dad. I hope you have a hope-filled day too. Love, Austin. Mm-hmm. So later that afternoon, about 1:30, Austin FaceTimed me. And we FaceTimed for about 45 minutes, the day that he died. And he was on top of the world. He had decided not to play football. He was going to be a junior at Wabash College, there's only 2 all-male colleges left in the country, and that's significant for our story in a moment. Mm-hmm. I'll share why. So Wabash College, which is west of Indianapolis, is one of them. And then the other college, which is Hampden-Sydney, which is in Virginia, is the other. I was just there in March and spoke to their student body. Mm-hmm. So Austin, he told me all about his classes that semester. He just started them and how he was just, so much happier because he didn't have the rigors of football practice and all of that. He decided he was going to concentrate on getting ready for grad school and, taking some of those exams and trying to figure out if he wanted to go to law school or get his MBA or whatever. Mm-hmm. So we talked for a while, and 45 minutes. And I always say, we talked every Sunday. So this was like a Thursday, Friday. And I said, well, I'll talk to you on Sunday, honey. And he said, I'll talk to you on Sunday, Mom. And that was the last time I ever heard my son's voice. And about I guess it was about 1 o'clock in the morning that evening. Or no, it was more like it was probably closer to before midnight or so. We, my husband is a real sound sleeper. He can sleep through almost anything. Everything wakes me up. I'm a very light sleeper, and so I heard, the pounding on our door and the ringing of our doorbell. Just like my house was on fire, and I jumped out of bed and I said to my husband Keith, I said somebody's at the front door. And before he could even get out of bed, Jessica, I was bolting down the front stairs. And we had two windows on the side of our front door, and I looked through and I could see the police car parked in front of our house. And the police officer said, do you have a son named Austin Weirich who attends Wabash College? By that time, Keith had already made his way downstairs and he was standing behind me. And I said, yes, we do. And he said, well, your son's been in an accident and you need to call this number. So he gave us a card that had the dean's name and number on it from the college. And I was running back in the house trying to find my cell phone, and we were in the kitchen. We both called that number, and the dean answered and told us that there had been an accident in his townhouse that evening, and he was with a young woman who was his girlfriend at the time, and he had shot himself. And he said that they were life flighting him to St. Vincent's in Indianapolis, and that we needed to get there as quickly as we could. What made it hard for us was that there was a storm that night, and it was really bad. I mean, I say this when I speak and I give my keynotes, I've driven through a lot of thunderstorms in my lifetime, but I've never driven through rain or thunder or lightning like we had to drive through that night. And we had 3 hours ahead of us. So we were about a half hour down the road, and my cell phone rang, and it was the emergency room doctor. He asked if we were on our way, and I told him that we were. And he wanted to know if we could pull over to the side of the road so he could talk to us. He told us the ambulance had just arrived with our son, and he was sorry to tell us that there was no pulse. And we sat there for probably a good 10, 15 minutes. I don't even know, but in the dark on the side of that road. And, my husband just hit his fist on the steering wheel, and he said, Leslie, I just feel like even God's crying with us tonight. And I believe that he was. We drove on the next 2.5 hours pretty much in silence, and pulled into that hospital parking lot, and we went in. I went in first. Keith was looking for a place to park the car, and told him who I was. And at that point, a chaplain came out, Chaplain Paul, and Keith was coming in. And by that time, he took us to the back to the lounge where he could sit down with us. And the first thing they asked us was, if we wanted to see our son. And I'm a woman of faith, and I'll say this: there's many times when I speak words that I don't know where they come from, but I know where they come from. And we both said no, because our son's not even here anymore. I don't know how each family will receive that when they hear it, but you have to do what's right for you in the moment. In that moment, we knew we didn't want the last memory of Austin to be at that hospital that night. So we made the decision. We were really, really fortunate. Somehow or other, I seemed to be calling out things in the middle of the night that, were time sensitive, that we needed to know. And I said, I wish we could have donated his organs because he was so big and strong and healthy. And the doctor asked if he was an organ donor. And I said, I know he was, because I took him to get his driver's license. So because we had a heartbeat on the way to the hospital, we were able to donate both of his corneas, both of his heart valves, which were very meaningful to me, as you know, and all of his bone and tissue. So somehow or other, that helped us feel like we weren't leaving everything there, that phone calls were being made, eyesight was being restored, things were happening in people's lives because of Austin's decision to become an organ donor, and that really helped us. What made our story extremely rare was on the 2-year anniversary of Austin's death, which would be World Suicide Prevention Awareness Day. I don't know if I said that, but Austin took his life on September 10th, which by sheer coincidence happens to be World Suicide Prevention Awareness Day in 2016. So the first year was just a blur. We were just really getting through each day as it came and trying to take care of our daughter, who was 17. He took his life 3 days before her 17th birthday. And trying to get her through high school and stuff. And on year 2, we get a text message later that afternoon from one of Austin's former roommates. And he said, Mr. and Mrs. Weirich, I don't know if you heard, but Evan Hansen, the co-captain of the Wabash football team, took his life today. And I didn't want you to hear about it, especially on the news. So now our grief, which we're still navigating through, is, compounded. We're sharing it with another family out of Carmel, Indiana, Indianapolis, and we've become very good friends with them. So Evan Hansen was only 21 years old. So both young men knew each other. Both played football in the same small all-male college, and both died by suicide on World Suicide Prevention Awareness Day. And so a week after Evan's death, his parents got out very, very early. Evan had, they were so brave to donate his brain tissue immediately after the accident. And it came back confirmed stage 1 CTE, chronic traumatic encephaly, from repeated blows to the brain, because Evan had been playing football since he was 7 years old. And so they spoke to the Indianapolis Star a week later. We were contacted and asked if we'd share our part of the story. They thought if both families shared their stories, somehow or other, we might be able to spare another family from having to go down this path. So we agreed, and we had never really openly spoken about it until then in a newspaper. And our story came out on a Wednesday in the Indianapolis Star, and by Saturday, it had made national news as a human interest sports story.
Wow.
And that really launched my speaking, Jessica. I started getting phone calls then asking if I'd come and share our story, and more and more and more. And then a few months later, in 2019, I spoke at the largest nonprofit in our state. I spoke at their annual fundraiser. I took the stage the last 24 minutes that evening, and they broke a 5-year fundraising record. We raised $249,000 to put licensed clinical therapists in schools.
Wow.
So at that point, I said, okay, God, you've got my story. You've got me, and you've got my story. You're just going to have to open up doors. And wow, did he take me up on that? He has opened a lot of big doors for me, and I'm very, very grateful. Very grateful.
That's incredible. I would love to know a little bit about Austin, about who he was in his physical body, what he was like as a young man, because I think it's easy to talk about the death or the thing that happened, but I think it's also so important to know about what they were like in life. And so I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
I love that question, and thank you for asking me, because I usually say at some point, suicide's the only form of death where we focus more on how they died than who they were and how they lived. Austin was a high achiever. He was a hard worker. He was the president of his freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior class at his high school.
Wow.
Yep. He ran track, played football all 4 years he was there. He was voted scholar athlete in one or both of those sports. He was a Hugh O'Brien Leadership Award winner, which you have to be a rising junior, only one student in the entire high school. You get nominated by your principal, and you go to a leadership conference that summer. He was a member of the Stay in Bounds ambassadors. He put on his letter jacket. He was a big guy, 6'4", 240 pounds. He'd put on his letter jacket, and, just his big physical presence. These little kids would just look up to him. He was their role model. And he talked to them about making good choices in life and doing good things. And he just, if there was an award, Jessica, he crushed it, I tell everybody, I share who he was when I give my talks. And I said, I don't tell you all about my son to boast about him or his achievements or his accomplishments, although I was proud of him. I share that because that's the face of suicide. That's what it looks like. And high achievers equal high risk. So we need to be really careful, particularly with young men, because we know suicide is reported 79% in men, but I feel like that's underreported because all suicides are underreported. It's over 80% in young men. But I feel like there has to be conversation flowing around the dinner table, in the car, on the track field. Everywhere we go, we have to normalize talking about mental health because we all have it. There's a difference between mental illness and mental health. And I want to make sure that your listeners understand that. Mental health we all have. If we have a head, we have
Hmm.
mental health, right? But mental illness is different, and mental illness can be more challenging. That can be a clinical diagnosis of bipolar or borderline or schizophrenia or something. You might need some medication. You might need some therapy. But mental health we all have. But we can go down a very quick um, rabbit trail here where we can go from being just fine one moment to not fine the next. And it can be that quick because the young brain, and we can talk about the brain because it's all about the prefrontal cortex as I teach these kids in schools and stuff and wherever I speak. So before the age of 25, the brain is not fully developed. So in that time, there's a lot of impulsive things that young people do. You did impulsive things when you were young. I did impulsive things when I was young. But now, more than ever, when we have sort of desensitized, I say, so many things with social media that you know, young men, particularly with this young, impulsive brain, have a tendency to think it's the worst thing that's ever happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they don't have a frame of reference. They don't have life to look back on and say, I got through that, I'll get through this too. So, in order to really build that resiliency, we need to start very young. And when I say very young, I mean elementary school, middle school. We need to start very young, building that resiliency in young people so they know that they can get through this. They know they can hang on. And that's, a big part of what I teach and I talk about when I go out and speak on military bases. I tell them we talk a lot about their brain. We talk about why they're losing so many soldiers. We talk about why it's happening. And I believe 100% it's happening because I don't think anybody wants to end their life. The most suicidal teen in the world, the most suicidal person, doesn't want to end their life in that moment. They're not really trying to die. They want to shut down the pain that they're feeling. And the pain is so overwhelming them that they cannot think clearly. When I say this, I mean their brain is offline like your computer is offline. So if we can slow them down and give them the power of the pause to think about things a little differently, they'll get through those suicidal moments because they are just moments. A heightened sense of suicidality lasts anywhere from 2 hours to 12 hours. So if we can get someone through that period of time, get them to hold on, chances are greater than 90% they'll never die by suicide. So it's really,
Wow,
really, yep, it's very, very important that we
that's
teach them,
incredible.
not that their brain is going to be ready, but they can understand why they have these big emotions and these big feelings, which I talk about the big emotions, which are anger, anxiety, and sadness, and how you can hold on when those emotions take over your brain. Because I say Evan and Austin's story was very different. Suicide's very unique, but it comes down to that crucible moment when, one thing triggers them and that impulsivity takes over. The front of the brain can't focus or think, and then they make a decision to shut it down, and in that decision they lose their life.
Wow. So, I mean, there's a million questions I have out of that, but
Sure.
how do we build that resilience muscle in especially our young men? And
Right.
I guess I think that you're right. I think, there's a lot going on with young men in our culture. I think that we've kind of elevated our young women and we have forgotten about our young men. And I think we can
I would
all,
agree.
rising tides lift all ships. We can all
Right.
be supported. And so I personally have an interest in that, but like, how do we build those muscles in our kids?
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
would love for you to share a couple things that even parents listening can do
Right.
to help train them in that
Right.
way.
Right. And I believe you had Nicole Runyon on. Did you have
I
Nicole Runyon?
did,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. Who's a wonderful
He's
licensed therapist.
amazing.
She's fantastic. So, Nicole talks about, I say we have to let our kids fail when they're young because
Mm.
failure is not failure. Failure is education. Failure is teaching them how to get through things till they get the next thing, which is going to be bigger. So it's a training ground for them, right? So instead of running over and picking them up when they fall, you know, you can we cheer them on, but we have to let them feel uncomfortable in the moment and get through that discomfort. That's how you build resiliency. They look back and go, whoa,
Mm.
I lived through that. I can live through this. But if we go clean it up and fix it up for them immediately and take away the discomfort and not let them problem solve for themselves, they don't build that resiliency and learn how to get through the next hard thing. So as life goes on, we know problems get bigger, things get
Mhm.
harder, right? So when they're young, really, really, really important. And we put a program in schools called Sources of Strength. And Sources of Strength teaches resiliency through 8 protective factors. And there's an elementary school model, and then there's a middle school model, and then there's a high school model. And it teaches, I'm trying to remember what the 8 factors are now. We've got family support. That looks different for all kinds of kids. Family support, positive friends, mentors. Those are our people, what we are, or who we hang out with. The next are healthy activities. That can be a sport, but that can be a lot of things. That can be music, that can be poetry, that can be anything that lifts your spirits. So healthy activities, I'm trying to remember, faith and spirituality, and gratitude. Gratitude is great because the gratitude muscle is huge, because you cannot be angry or sad or at the same time that you're grateful for something. So when you're practicing gratitude, so I have them put it in their phones, depending on their age, if they have phones, whatever. I have them put in, my 3 reasons for living today are.
Mm.
Now, I don't care if it's their dog. I don't care what it is. It's their reason, not mine. But I need them to say this out loud. We can talk about neuroplasticity and all that, but we need to say them out loud, because when they say it out loud to themselves, like they're getting ready to go take a test, they're really anxious, they're really nervous about it. They say these things to themselves. My 3 reasons for living today are, then, uh, and they continue to say them over and over and over, then, it builds this resiliency in them, that they know that they have things to look forward to. We can talk about hope. They have things to look
Mhm.
forward to, and they have a reason to be here.
Hey there, it's Jess, and we're taking a brief pause to highlight this show's sponsor, the Heartstrong Collective. It's more than just a nonprofit, it's a social movement I founded to inspire people worldwide to embody resilience and grow through challenges. Through the Heartstrong Collective, we're dedicated to empowering caregiving families, investing in the next generation, and leaving the world just a little bit better than we found it. To learn more about our mission and how you can get involved, visit us at theheartstrong.com.
So to build resiliency, it's really, really about getting in there very early, letting them go through uncomfortable things. And then after it's over, you're going to get with them and you're going to talk to them about what happened and what they learned from it, but not running in to fix everything. Because when we run in to fix everything, we don't give them a chance to build that resiliency by looking back and going, ooh, I got through that. This is going to be okay too. um, and teaching them gratitude very young, that there will always be, no matter how hard things are, no matter what you go through in life, there will always be something somewhere that you can be grateful for. And when you say that out loud, it trains your neural pathways and it trains your brain to be holding on for what's coming next. And I tell them, you can change your 3 things, you can add to them, but I need you to have 3 things every day. When you get up, when you get in the shower in the morning, when you're walking to school, whatever it is, I need you to be saying those throughout the day. When you're anxious about taking a test, say them out loud, because it actually calms down your nervous system. Gratitude can calm us down. And so those are some things that I think are really, really important to teach young people.
Yeah, those are, I mean, those are important for all of us. But I think a lot of times we come across those things as adults, right? And we're
Right.
not consciously thinking about those in young people. I want to ask you about the prefrontal cortex and
Sure.
how that is involved in the things that you were just talking about.
Well, I believe, and I say this in all my talks, and you'd have to hear my entire talk and it would make sense, but I say, Austin and Evan had an amygdala hijack. Your amygdala is the first part of our brain. It's the back of our brain here. It's our fight or flight or freeze, right? We need it It's back there. It's developed early to keep us safe so we don't touch a hot stove, so we don't run in front of a car. It's a fight, flight, or freeze. But the thing about it is, the prefrontal cortex is the most important part of the brain, and it's not developed. They say 25. I think it's more like 27. To some psychiatrists and psychologists say it's even 30, depending on the trauma that you've had as a child.
Mm.
But it is higher level decision making. It's executive level functioning. It is reasoning, judgment, logic, um, uh, self-control, anger management. All those really important big duties are up there in the prefrontal cortex, which isn't ready till we're 25 years old. So I tell everybody, my son looked like this big, strong football player, but in the heat of an argument with a young woman that evening, do you think he could have used some anger management? Do you think he could have used some impulse control? Those are all housed up there. He had 5 more years for that part of his brain to be fully developed. 5 more years. And so I said, the prefrontal cortex is everything when it comes to keeping us safe. And until it's really fully functioning, and so many times, if you look at the age of a suicide, especially, I guess I'd say over the last year to 2 years, young men, and I want to talk about specifically young men now because it's Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. Young men will take their life over the breakup of a personal relationship because they have got their whole identity wrapped up in that. Now, I think for my son, what really happened with my son was his freshman year, he had 3 back-to-back football injuries. Now, Austin Weirich loved the game of football. He would have gone out there on bloody knees, bloody ankles, whatever it was, to play the game of football. He had just really weird things. He had something called a boutonniere deformity. He shredded tendons in his left ring finger. And then 2 weeks later, he separated his AC joint in his right shoulder. His freshman year, he had a splint on his left ring finger and a sling on his right arm, carrying around a laptop, trying to carry books, And then 3 weeks later, he was carried by ambulance off the field during practice because he popped out his elbow, and because of his size and what a big boy he was, they had to take him to the hospital to put him under to get the elbow back in. And that was a painful injury. Now, he had those 3 injuries, and by the 3rd one, he was out for the season in October. Couldn't play anymore. Got back in there his sophomore year. It was never the same. He could never, ever play football the same. If he wasn't a football player, he'd been playing since the 5th grade. If he wasn't a football player, who was he? Who was he? He lost his identity. And this is so important for parents who have kids that are in sports to help them understand that, you want them to do well. But if, God forbid, tomorrow that sport should be gone, that sport is part of their life. It is not their whole life. And so many young people get themselves so wrapped up in their sport that if something happens with an injury or something like that, they're out. That impulsivity, that lack of having that fully developed prefrontal cortex, it just flips a switch. And they're just like, I don't want to be here anymore. I can't take this. And they're gone. So we need to really realize with young athletes, especially, if they come off the field in high school sports, collegiate sports, if they come off the field with an injury, if we're wrapping that ankle, we better be talking to them. We better have a counselor in there. We better have a social worker. We better have somebody in there that they can be talking to about that, because it does impact their mind, their body, their spirit, and their soul. And so it's so important. Now, so with my son, he got involved in a very unhealthy relationship. And I can talk a lot about unhealthy relationships. And I give the 8 warning signs of unhealthy relationships when I speak on military bases, because the first military base I went to speak on in the end of 21, the week before Christmas, was Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. There was a lieutenant colonel who sent me a DM through LinkedIn. And he's like, hey, Leslie, I've been following your story. I've been reading about Austin, and I graduated from Wabash too. Well, Wabash is a teeny tiny college. He had me at that, He said, can you come on down here? I just lost my third soldier in my battalion, and we've lost 20 on this base this year. And 19 of the 20 soldiers took their lives over the breakup of personal relationships.
Oh my gosh.
Yep. So we hit hard on that. I hit very hard on that, and I talk about it, and I have a lot to say about unhealthy relationships, and a lot of it has to do with control. And so I give the warning signs. I tell them, I say, and they've already heard about Austin in my talk. I said, you saw my high achieving son. He missed 8 out of 8 of these warning signs. His friends saw them, his roommates saw them, his dad and I saw them, but he couldn't see them because those hormones are so big at that age, you know? And so I said, it's really, really important that you know that, no matter what's going on in your life, I said, it's so honorable that you are serving our country and willing to lay down your life for your country. There is zero honor in laying down a life over a girlfriend cheating on you or a boyfriend cheating on you. Because I do talk to female soldiers too, just not as many because it's predominantly male. But you have to hold on. So I tell my story. I go into a deep dive of it. We talk about the brain. We talk about the 8 warning signs of unhealthy relationships. And here comes the hard part, Jessica. Then I have to say this, and I have to say it, and it works. I have to say, if you recognize one of those warning signs, I need you to leave my talk this afternoon, and I need you to go give your firearm to a battle buddy to lock up for you, because there is nobody that's going to think sitting in here today, I'm going to take my life. It just happens in that impulsive moment, like it did with my son. And if I can interrupt that by you not having your firearm with you, we got a better chance of getting you through that moment till we can talk to you and save your life. So, and they said my talks are extremely effective because they view me as a mom. I'm a mom, right? And I give them a task list, and they're soldiers. And so they follow the task list. And the second talk I gave at Fort Bliss, the chaplain came to pick me up the next morning to take me back over to the theater to speak. He was real Southern, and he said, well, Miss Leslie, he said, you're doing a good job. He said, I'll tell you what happened yesterday. He said, we had a young soldier come in the chaplaincy office, and he said, I know I need some help. I need to talk to somebody. And they said, well, what's going on? He said, well, if I would have had my firearm last night, he goes, I would have shot her and turned it on myself, but I didn't have it. So I need some help. So he said, there's 2 lives, Miss Leslie. He said, keep on going, keep on talking. So, and there's many, many stories like that I can share with you. I was at Fort Cavazos, formerly Fort Hood. They renamed 9 Army bases last year and removed the Confederate name. So Fort Cavazos, formerly Fort Hood, is one of the largest in the country. It's huge. There's over 100,000 soldiers on that base. And so I was invited there to do a kickoff suicide prevention summit by General Sean Bernabe. He had heard me speak at Fort Bliss and invited me there. They had all these researchers there. They had a lot of people coming in to speak, and they wanted me to kick off the summit with my personal story of loss. So when they called me, I said, I'm really honored that you want me to do that. But I said, the Army's had their worst year ever for suicide. You're double the civilian rate. I need to talk to the soldiers. If I'm coming there, I need to speak to the soldiers. So they set up 5 soldier talks in 3 days. The last talk on Friday afternoon, this was last May, the last talk on Friday afternoon. And I always say the greatest, I think for me, the most powerful thing that happens when I speak, Jessica, is when I shut up and stop speaking. Because they've heard my messy story. They know everything. And they line up on the side of the stage wherever I am. If they don't have to be somewhere, they will wait 45 minutes to an hour just to unload, just to share their story, just to tell me what's going on with them. So I saw this young soldier. He was sitting over in the back of the stadium, and his people were kind of making their way down. He made his way down, and he was crying. And he said he had broken up with his girlfriend on the way to my talk. And he said he stayed with her longer than he should have because she was expecting a child. And we talked about all the reasons why he needed to be a healthy father. He didn't need to be in an unhealthy relationship, but he could be a healthy father. And he said that this was Friday afternoon, he was getting deployed on Monday. Um, and he had a plan on Saturday to take his life. So there's something called MFLACs. They're military family life counselors. And so we talked for a long time. And then I walked him up to the MFLACs office and she started working with him. And he's still here. He has a little girl.
Mm.
And and the funny thing is about that is I never ever hardly do this. For some reason that afternoon I said, shout out to my soldiers out there from Indiana. Anybody from Indiana?
Mm.
He was the only one that raised his hand. And his name was Austin.
Oh, wow.
So I know it was meant to be. And
Yeah.
so I have a lot of those stories now, many, many of those stories now. And I know that uh, suicide will never get rid of all suicide in the military or in the civilian world, but we can definitely get our numbers down by, really elevating the conversation and starting to talk more and there's never going to be enough licensed clinical therapists. This is a point I need to make. I love therapists. They have a great purpose. They can really help a lot of people, but there will never be enough of them for all the hurting people in the world. So we're it. You,
Mm.
me, all of us, Jessica. And it's just looking up from our stupid devices and noticing what's going on around us. And we're so oblivious in this world because our heads are down. And our heads, I talk about this on LinkedIn. I'm like, look up. We have to
Mhm.
look up and we have to notice people and what's going on around us.
Mhm.
So I think it's so much of that is just paying attention. And I talk to the soldiers about unplugging, having an hour a day where they just walk across space without their phone, or they sit at the PX without their phone. They're just noticing what's going on. Very, very important.
I love the point that you made, especially about student athletes, because I think parents are so wrapped up in their kids' athletics, especially these days. I have, you know, I mean, I love sports. I love what my husband was a college football player. I played sports through high school. Like, I've come from a very athletic family. And it's easy to get wrapped up in it because it's fun, right?
Right,
And
right,
it's something that we all enjoy. But I think that I think to me, in listening to, like, one of the risk factors, and even when I talked to Nicole Runyon, who her podcast will be coming
right,
out soon, I mean, she talked a lot about the parents and our responsibility as parents. And
right,
we like to say, well, the kids are the problem. No, we're the problem. We're the
right,
problem.
right,
And so I think for parents listening, it's also us all, and I'm including myself in it, taking responsibility and enjoying the sports and encouraging them in their craft, but tempering it and making sure that that identity is in who they are,
right.
and also, like, calling out other gifts that our kids have besides just the sport, because the problem is in the
100%.
schools. I mean, the schools love the athletes and they fund the football program. You know how it is.
Yes.
It's like, well, what else are you good at? How else could we be cultivating things that are your interests? And I don't know, it just made me think about that when you said that is an important thing for us to be paying attention to as parents.
It's so important, and um, I think now for our son, he was a great student too. I mean, he was an
Mhm.
excellent student and he was an excellent athlete, but the problem that he had was failure. He
Mm.
couldn't fail. He had to be perfect at everything, and uh, I think perfectionism really killed my son more than
Mm.
anything else because he was not able to ever have anything that just didn't line up perfectly. He could
Mm.
work himself so hard and have success on the football field, or he could work himself so hard and have success in the classroom. But relationships are not perfect, and
Mm.
young relationships are definitely not perfect. So if you have a son or a daughter and you're listening to this right now, which I hope you are, and they're in a relationship, you may think that's a great relationship, but you don't know what's going on. And so and so I think it's really, really important that you're continuing to have the conversation with these young people about these relationships that they're in, because sometimes they get so codependent on them in high school and in college that if there's a breakup or something goes on, happens, then once again, the prefrontal cortex is not prepared to take on what's coming at it. So I think it's extremely important that parents are always talking to their kids about who you're with, why are you with them, what are you gaining from this, and it's just a really, really important conversation. And there can't be a sense of control in that relationship. And I think so many young relationships, there's so much jealousy and so much control, and that in and of itself is a huge red flag. So make sure that, if your young person is in a relationship, that they know that they have the freedom to get out of it when they see things are not going a certain way. And for our son, he knew it wasn't a healthy relationship. He had told friends, he said, "My mom and dad are right. This probably isn't a healthy relationship." Um, but she had a control on him. And then when she was ready to break up with him, he couldn't handle it. And so I think it's really very, very important that once again, their identity doesn't get wrapped up in who they're with, just like sports. So it can't be that their identity is in one thing at that young age. They have to try different things. They have to be involved in more than one thing. And that helps build resiliency too, because maybe they're really great at one thing and maybe they're not so great at another, but maybe they have fun at it, or maybe they, so they're more well-rounded when they go into college.
Those are such good points. I'm wondering if you would share some risk factors or warning signs of suicide that if parents are listening that they, might be looking for or aware of. And I know the relationship, that was one I hadn't thought of, but that was a really good point.
Well, I get asked this question a lot, and there's two ways that I can answer. These two ways I answer it, Jessica. I always say there really aren't any, because it can happen to anybody at any time. If you see everyone that's taking their life, just like the PGA golfer a few weeks ago, everyone was so shocked, but I mean, he had struggled with having some addiction issues and things like that. But I think, to break it down for parents, your child, their routine, what time they go to bed, what time they get up, who their friends are, what they do in the course of their day. Anything that's out of their routine. Now, I don't mean like just one thing, but I mean, if they've always been like, say they've always been really, really, they're on time for everything. And then all of a sudden they don't really care about that anymore and they're running late, could be a red flag. Could be a red flag. Not always, but something, so anything that's out of the ordinary of what they normally do. Now, some people will say, oh, they start giving away their things. They can and they cannot, because I think so many of young, youthful, I want to say teen and preteen suicide is impulsive. So there isn't a lot of pattern to follow. But I think if you're looking for anything, notice what they're doing, and is anything changed in their behavior. Are they sleeping more than they used to? Maybe are they like I said, we're always early and they're always late. Are they not hanging out with their friends anymore, or maybe hanging out with a new crowd of friends that you're not so crazy about, or don't think that that's a good influence on them? So anything that's out of the ordinary of their normal behavior and what their pattern is what parents need to be really, really concerned about and having a conversation.
And
And
so
yeah.
I'm
Go
sorry, I
ahead.
was going to say, so if you notice that, what do you do?
If you notice that, you have to have the conversation and you have to say the S word. You have to say suicide, okay? You can't say, oh, have you thought about maybe kind of, you have to say, have you ever had thoughts of suicide? Have you ever thought about suicide? And, and then you need to shut up and be quiet and let them talk, because they may say yes, which is going to be like you're going to be, don't be like a deer in the headlights, the best thing you can say is, tell me more. Tell me about that. What does that feel like? Ask them open-ended questions, and then you can assess whether you need to go see someone, whether they need a therapist, whether they need to go see somebody. So if you can remain calm, which I know is not easy for a lot of parents to do, but you've got to pull your own emotion out of it. And you've got to have this very practical, pragmatic talk with your child about suicide. And I think it's a great conversation to be having when they're going into middle school because they're hearing about it. You think you're not saying
Mm-hmm.
anything? They're hearing about it. They're talking about it. They're seeing memes about it. They're
Mm-hmm.
seeing it on social media. So you're just not talking to them about it, but they're hearing about it everywhere else. So you need to be having the conversation with them very early, and you need to talk to them openly about it. And and what that feels like, and what do they think about that, and are they struggling with anything right now? And then, you can talk to them about, this is part of life and this is what we go through. But here's the thing, we don't have to go through it alone. We always have people ahead of us who've gone through it, and they're on the other side, and they're here to pull us through and make sure that we're going to be all right. So that's what we need to do. And we need to make sure that, you know, I, I can't speak highly enough about mentors. And that's one of the 8 sources of strength is mentoring. Mentors are so important in a kid's life. And I tell parents, I say, don't be offended if your teenager doesn't want to talk to you. They're a teenager, right? But I said, make sure they have trusted adults in their life, whether it's a coach, whether it's somebody at school, a youth group leader, whoever it might be. Make sure they have trusted adults that they can talk to. It is one of the most protective factors that you can give your kids as they're growing up. And so, having mentors in their lives is extremely important as they're growing up, and multiple ones, not just one, but multiple ones.
Mm-hmm. Wow, this is such amazing information. And I think something like I love that you're giving us permission to talk about this
Oh,
with
yes.
our kids, with our teens. I think you're right. They are hearing about it. And with social media and with YouTube shorts and with everything, it's like, I mean, I know even sometimes me, I want to pretend like this isn't happening. It's like
I know.
because it's so much and there's
Yeah.
so much that they're exposed to. It's like, I just want to take these phones and throw them out the window. But
Yes.
you're right. It's kind of forcing us to be honest with them and to be honest about the world that they're in.
Right.
Um, and I'm wondering, once parents talk about it and once they're open about it, is that something that sort of prevents it? I mean, by kind of calling it out, is that
Yeah.
because I think a
Yeah.
lot of times people would be nervous to talk
Right.
about it because then they're like, am I giving them the idea?
Great point. Great point. Great point. Great question. And if your listeners only hear one thing or get one thing out of this entire conversation today, this is my nugget, okay? You can never give someone the idea of suicide by talking to them about it. Okay? Never. Okay? If I came into your studio today to record this podcast, Jessica, and you said to me, "Hey, Leslie, I have to ask you something. Have you thought about suicide lately?" And I'd think, "No, not today, Jessica. I'm not thinking about it. It's not even in my brain." Okay? If I'm thinking about it and you ask me about it, that lets me know that you've seen my struggle. That lets me know that you've noticed something, and that gives me permission to talk. What you want to do is not do all the talking. You want them to do the talking. You want them to share their feelings and their emotions with you. So when you open up that door and you ask them about it, you're not giving them the idea. You can't give an idea to somebody about suicide. It's either there or it's not. Okay. And just by mentioning the word is not going to give somebody the idea. But what you can do if they're thinking about it or they've thought about it or they're struggling with anxiety or depression is you can open up a door to make them feel seen and safe and heard, and you can let them talk. And by letting them talk, 9 times out of 10, we can't solve each other's problems, but 9 times out of 10, Jessica, when we can say them out loud and we can verbalize them, they lose their power. They lose their power. And so don't be afraid to talk about it with your kids. It is the most life saving thing you will ever do for your child. And so you cannot give them the idea. By talking about it, you can give them permission to tell you how they feel. And when they open up and start to tell you, then you be quiet and let them talk and ask open ended questions. Gee, that sounds like that was really hard. Tell me more, and then just listen and let them talk. And it's okay if it's silent for a while, it's all right. Let them have their time and let them share with you what they're feeling and what they're going through. And then you can decide as a parent, do they need to go see somebody? You can ask them, do they need to go see somebody? And you can go with them. You can take them to talk to somebody. But, being present is the greatest gift you can give anybody because we're all so quick to rush in and fix everything. And that's where that resiliency comes from. So make sure that they know that you've got their back and you're there to listen. And it's incredibly protective.
That's such incredible advice. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about your book because it's called The Gifts of Grief, and I will be fully honest. I did not read it before this podcast, but I will after the podcast. And Leslie, you have quite a story that it spans before your son Austin's suicide. And you said something when we were off camera today that really, really just struck me. And you said, Austin's story is just part of my story.
Mm-hmm.
And, one would think that that's your full story by just looking at your LinkedIn and what you're doing, because you're making such incredible impact in the lives of people. But I think your wisdom and your depth comes from a life of grief and loss and love and faith. And it's such a richness. And so I'm wondering if you would just share a little bit about your book and a little bit about your story, because I think it gives context to you as a woman, as a leader. But I think it also gives, shines a light on the fact that we are all many things. I say this a lot. And the saddest part of our story is not our full identity. It's who we're becoming through it. And you're such an example of that. And so I'd love for you to just share a little bit more of you so that people can know that part of you too.
Well, thank you, Jessica. I wrote my book, The Gifts of Grief, and it came out on January 5th, which would have been Austin's 28th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say, I wrote my book for the one, but I also wrote it for myself. I've had a long life of loss. I lost 2 infant daughters 25 years ago. And we have that in common with a heart child.
Mm-hmm.
I lost a daughter to a heart defect, and I lost another daughter in my 7th month of my pregnancy. So I lost my best friend of 31 years. She died in her sleep from cardiomyopathy in 2018. She was 5 years younger than me. My mom and dad died at the ages they should, 89 and 91. Somebody said to me at my mom's funeral, how strong I was. And I said, well, my mom lived a good, wonderful, long life. And, I was ready for this one. I lost 2 brothers. I have a thing about dates because my mom and my daughter, who died with a heart defect, both died on the same day, which, believe it or not, is today, June 17th.
Oh my goodness.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. So 14 years apart. So, they both died on June 17th. I had 2 brothers who both died on November 27th. One died when he was 34 years old in 1980. He was my oldest brother. I was 21 years old and I was holding his hand when he took his last breath. He died with a brain tumor. And then during COVID, I lost my next oldest brother. He was 69 and he had leukemia. And I thought, he got to live twice as long as my oldest brother. He got to see all of his children grown. He got to meet all of his grandchildren. And so I think, and my oldest brother, who died at 34, would be the grandfather to 4 now that he never knew.
Wow.
He had 2 young daughters that were 5 and 10 when he died. So I've had a lot of loss. I lost 2 brothers. I lost 2 infant daughters. I lost my best friend. My mom and dad died at an older age. And then I lost a son at 20 years old to suicide. So I think the one thing that I know that we all will go through, whether we live a minute or 100 years, is grief.
Mm.
And grief is universal, speaks all languages, crosses all. My book is sold in so many different countries, and I think it's interesting when I look on Amazon. I like to look at what countries are buying my book. But um, you know, uh, grief is, and they always say grief comes in two parts. First is the loss, and second is the rebuilding of your life. Now, Austin's loss was a different kind of loss because it was suicide. So there's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of emotions that come in. What did I miss? What could I have seen? What could I have done? So that's a whole nother type of loss. But through all the losses that I've had, I think particularly Austin's loss, I have met some of the most incredible people that I'd ever want to know. I have some of the friends that I have that we don't all get around and talk about our kids. We talk about all kinds of things. I have a lot of survivor moms that I'm friends with that have lost children to suicide. Um, Incredible women. And I think that, you know, grief is our hardest teacher. It's our hardest teacher. And we don't get a chance to study for that test, as I say in my book.
Mhm.
But I do believe that what we do with that grief is so important in helping us move forward. We never get over it. And I always say grief is like a ball. Like, if you're at the lake or a pool, you take both your hands and you can hold a ball underwater. And as long as both your hands are on it, it's staying there. But you can feel it's wanting to push up, can't you? It's like trying to
Mhm.
push up. And I feel like that's grief. But then when you let your hands off that ball, it pops up and it floats on top of the water. And you're swimming around it. It's there. You know it's there. You carry it with you wherever you go. And it's always a part of you. But it's not all of you. And it's certainly it's not, we can never be defined by the best day in our life or the worst day in our life. So I feel like grief share my grief story was so important to share with people, especially people that had lost infants or people that had lost children to suicide. Um, and I take a chapter of each book, and I lost a sister to leukemia before she was born. So I lost three of my six siblings to cancer.
Wow.
So I feel like um, I take a chapter, including her chapter, the sister that I never knew because I had five older brothers. And I write about each life and what it meant to me and what I learned from that life that got me prepared for the next loss. And then I write about that life. And then at the end, it's Leslie's Hope, which is the name of my speaking organization, but it's also what I've done with post traumatic growth. This October, I'll be speaking in Ohio, in Cleveland, on the Symposium for Traumatic Loss. Now, traumatic loss can be a lot of things, not just suicide. It can be homicide, or it can be a car accident, or it can be anything, traumatic. But I'm so excited to be in a room with people who get it. You go into the room and you're just on a level with them and they get it, because you can't explain this type of grief to anybody. But it has come at a price that I wouldn't want anybody to ever have to pay. And I know a lot of people who've had multiple loss like I have had, and they are some of the most remarkable people I'd ever want to meet. But my faith has shored me up, and it has brought me to where I am today. And I
Mhm.
think that um, someday I know I will see my
Mhm.
people again. And I think that until I do, I feel like there's much to be done. And if I can, especially with suicide, if I can help any family, any school, anywhere, learn something from our story, even if it's
Mhm.
just one thing, um, then it's time well spent. And
Mhm.
so, my book hopefully is a gift to those who um, have had similar losses. And I've heard from a lot of people that certain things in certain chapters resonated with them. And that's really why I wrote it. I wrote it for the one, but many ones.
Mhm.
So I really hope and pray that there's some healing that takes place. Next spring, I'll speak we donated a room. We have a grief center here, a community-wide grief center. And when my mom passed away, we donated everything she had left to the grief center. So we have a room there. And anyone who's had any loss can go there for 13 months past the loss, free of charge, for certified grief counseling. And one of the certified grief counseling rooms is named after my parents. And as I say in my book, I just had no idea 2 years later I'd be receiving counseling in that room myself after Austin died. So I think it's a continuum of how life moves forward. And, um, you know, I didn't get to choose my grief. And, but I do get to choose how I go forward with it and what I do with it. And that's why I wrote my book, because I really hope and pray that it helps somebody see that your life's never going to be the same, but your life can be good again. And
Mhm.
so that's why I wrote it.
Mm. And I love how you called it the gifts of grief, because I do think it is the greatest teacher, as you said, and some of the most tremendous gifts come out of it. And it's also one of the most painful things to go through. And
Absolutely.
I always say I wouldn't choose it, but I wouldn't trade it. And I truly believe that about my life. Like I would, if it's like, if I had if it was lined up in a row and I got to pick one, I don't think I'd pick the one that I have necessarily, but having it now, like it's such a tremendous, rich gift. And I wouldn't trade that. And like, I totally echo the people that I have been able to meet. And, you know, I want to talk a little bit about your faith component, because I think it would be easy for people to listen and say, well, geez, Louise, you're a person of faith. Like, listen to all of that. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about your faith in light of all of this loss,
Mhm.
and how you frame it, and for you, what you think God is doing in your story. I mean, I think it's pretty clear, but people struggle. I mean, I think it's a totally honest and important and okay thing to completely question when we have these types of things.
Mhm. Yeah, I've had a lot of people say to me, aren't you angry at God? And can't you be so angry at him? And I
Mm.
said, you know what? I have been really angry at him. I
Mhm.
have been at my baby's grave and I have shook my fist at him and cried. And, I've been really angry at him, but I've never been without him.
Mm.
I can't be angry at somebody I don't believe in, right? So
Yep.
he's always been there, and it ebbs and it flows. And I know what that's like, Jessica, with all that you've gone through in your life. Um, I think that to me, the one constant, and I can't even explain, but the one thing that I know is number one, um, there's questions on this side of heaven I'm not going to get answers for.
Mm.
And the older I get, the more I lean into the mystery of it and just go, it's okay. I don't need my answers anymore. But I do believe with all my heart that I'll see them again. And I know that a lot of people think that suicide is an unforgivable sin. And I've had a lot of conversations with people about that. I know we've had a lot of confirmations after Austin died about where he was. And I know I'll see him again. Um, um, but I do believe with all my heart that God's using our story for a greater purpose and a greater good. And all I want to know is when I leave this earth, I do want to hear, "Well done, good and faithful
Mm.
servant."
Mm.
And so I believe with all my heart that um, my husband and I are both, very strong in our faith. And we knew the night Austin died that we were going to grieve very differently together. Because if you take the difference between men and women, and I say, and you put grief in there on it, it like magnifies it, right?
Yes, it
So
does.
we were going to be grieving separately, but together. And so we were going to allow each other enough space and grace to grieve in our own way, and no blame and no, condemnation. We were just going to move forward through this. And I'd say our marriage is stronger now than it's ever been.
Mm.
And I think that and a lot of it is because of our loss. And a lot of it is because of what we came through together.
Mm.
So I think that, everyone has to find their own way. But for me, I I want to think about hope, And hope to me is defined as looking forward. And it's forward motion, forward movement, looking forward. And the thing that I am looking the most forward to someday is being reunited with everybody. And so until then, I'm here and I have to go on. And and I could sit home and be ashamed of my son's suicide, or I could sit home and, you know, wallow about the babies that I lost, or I could sit home, but it's not going to do anything. It's not going to help move me forward. So for me, as for me in my house,
Mm-hmm.
we will worship the Lord till the day I'm no longer here, and then I see Him.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's
that
beautiful.
is, yeah,
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Do you believe in signs? Like, do you get signs from Austin or
yeah,
from your other
yeah,
girls?
yeah.
What were your girls' names, by the way?
My oldest daughter was Elizabeth, but we would have called her Liza. And then my second little girl had my maiden name, which was Collier, and she had
Mm,
her sister, so it
yeah.
was Collier Elizabeth. So it was Collier Elizabeth. Yeah.
Mm,
I, we had a lot of things right when Austin died that happened very like quickly to kind of just. I think we needed that stamp of
mhm,
confirmation. And there's someone that writes on LinkedIn, and I love her. And she writes about Carrie. I just blanked her last name, but she knows who she is. She writes about glimmers of hope,
mm,
and glimmers of hope are what I was looking for. So the first glimmer of hope that I had in that night, and I talk about this in my keynote, I was grasping for just something. Give me a sign. Give me a sign. I was saying, I need to know I'm going to get through this night. Give me a sign. Give me a sign. And the fact that he had a heartbeat when he got into the ambulance, that we were able to get, we were able to harvest so much. The corneas, both of my parents lost their eyesight at the end of their lives from different reasons. So I kept thinking about what that meant for somebody to get a call that their eyesight was being restored.
mm.
So the corneas, the heart valves, how much that meant.
I
And then
do.
all the bone and tissue, I didn't realize, is used so many times for cancer patients. So they freeze a lot of it. So I would get a letter from Indiana organ donor, and they would say, um, part of Austin's knee was given to blah, blah, blah. And they would tell me when things were being given out. So for me, that was such a huge glimmer of hope that night. Um, and then we got home when Austin was uh, well, all through middle school, high school, he would come down. He'd always be sore in the morning from football. Oh, mom, I'm so sore.
Mm,
And I'd always rub his big old head. I'd always rub his head for him. And the morning after he died, um, our nephew, who never knew that I rubbed his head, never knew any of it, um, said he'd had a dream and that he saw Jesus rubbing Austin's head and saying, "He's all
oh
right.
my gosh.
He's all right.
Wow.
I've got him. He's with me now. And this is not a time to be sad." And so I
Mm,
knew when I heard that, I was like, okay. And then there was one more I have to share with you. So Romans 15:13, which is, may the God of all hope fill you with all joy and peace. So that as you, okay. So my daughter was really, really involved with her youth group. And uh, so the night after Austin died, her youth group advisor called us and said that they had made something for her and they wanted to bring it by, a gift. And all the students had signed the back of it. They'd all signed it, and everybody in youth group signed it. So that was the last scripture verse that Keith sent that morning, was, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may abound but with from power of the Holy Spirit. So um uh nobody ever even knew Keith sent those scripture verses to the kids. It was just our thing that we did as a family. That evening, when she brought over the big sign to be that they had all done the back of and everything, the scripture verse was, may the God of all hope fill
oh
you with
my
all joy and
goodness.
peace as you trust in him. So that we
Wow.
had that at his service. And that was that we really, there's that hope, that element of hope is so strong in our story that there's just no way I can't talk about it.
Mm.
So that is, I mean, there's just many, many signs, but those were some that we had.
Some of the
Yeah.
ones. Those are beautiful. One of the things that I've often thought about um, when my son Ethan died. I mean, he was such a joy-filled kid, and I almost felt like he was like passing the baton to me,
Yeah,
for
I do.
what more I was supposed to be doing with his story, with his life, and I kind of sense that same thing. I think that Austin passed you a baton and said, "Okay, mom,
Yeah.
Now you got to run,
Yeah.
and you're doing that in
Yeah.
such a beautiful way. I want to ask you one final question that I always ask my guests, but before I do that, I want to tell people, like, where can people find you
Okay.
if they'd love for you to come speak, or they want to
Sure.
read your book will link in the show notes, but tell people where they can find you.
Okay. You can find me daily on LinkedIn. I write a daily mental health post.
Yes, I can say it's
Yeah.
amazing. Got to follow her.
I write a story. I write something I saw, somebody I was with. I just write about life on LinkedIn. So you can always find me on LinkedIn. You can send me a DM if you'd like me to come and speak. Send me a DM. You can also find me at Leslie, Leslie, at Leslie's Hope, LESLIESHOPE.org. So those are the two places you can find me anywhere, anytime. Um, and what was the second question you asked me?
I just said, where could people find you? And I said
Okay.
we would link the show notes. We'll
Okay.
link the book in the show notes. So
Okay.
yeah, so I just want to make sure people can get in touch with you if they want to bring you into their community or their school or whatever. And you do need to follow Leslie on LinkedIn. She has an amazing, you're just a good writer, and it's just I always get something out of it. It's just so
Thank
it's
you.
wonderful. So the question that I always end the podcast is like, what is one thing that you love about yourself because of the disappointments that you're faced? What is something you can say, I love this about Leslie because it's been built through adversity?
Well, I have a lot of people throw around the R word, resiliency, when
Mm,
it comes to me. And they'll say, "Oh, Leslie, you're so resilient," And I said, "Well, I am, but it's resilience born of pain, right? Born
mhm,
of loss." Um, but I think one of the things that I love about myself so much is that I don't sweat the small stuff anymore.
mm,
And I'll share one final quick story with you. So I was taking my car in to get it serviced, and my dealership's like 10 minutes from my house, and so I looked down and I realized I forgot my phone, and I was going to go back and get it because I was running early. And I thought, no, I'm not going to get my phone. I'm going to practice what I preach. I'm going to go on. I'm going to notice things this morning. I'm going to be engaged. So I get there, and the first thing that I notice is there's orange construction cones everywhere. And everybody is, just angry. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. People are mad because they have to go around cones to get in there and, this and that. And so I go to the back of the lounge, and they're working on my car. About half hour later, they come to get me. And the service manager, I notice him. I know him because I've seen him in there and everything. And I kind of tap him on the arm and I said, "Hey, Neil, buddy, don't let these people get you in a bad mood today, buddy." I said, "If a little construction's the worst problem that they have," I said, "have them call me." I said, "I'll be happy to give him I said, "I'll be happy to talk to him." I said, he kind of looks at me real funny, looks down at me. He's this tall guy. And I said, "Yeah, Neil, we lost our son 7 years ago to suicide. So I don't sweat the small stuff like a little
mm,
construction." He looks at me and he says, "Me too, Leslie." He said, "I lost my dad coming up on 10 years in August." And he said, and so then stood there for a little bit, and he told me about his dad. He had PTSD, he'd been in Vietnam, never talked to anybody about it, and eventually took
mm,
his life. And so later on that night, I get a message from Neil's mom. And she said, "You don't know me, but I'm Neil's mom. And I want to thank you for whatever it was you said to him today, because he never opens up about his dad. He never tells anyone.
mm,
But you gave him permission to do so." Well, I say I did that because I didn't have my phone with me. And so I was noticing, I was paying attention to things. But also, I I don't sweat the small stuff like a little construction. So I said, so many people get so worked up in traffic, getting their coffee, whatever it is. If we could all just pause and think, what are three things I have to be thankful for today? What are three good things going on in my life? What are three
mhm,
things that I'm so grateful for? So I think I love the fact that I can see good in things while they're happening. Where it used to be, I'd reflect back and go, "Oh, now I can see it in the moment while it's happening." And I don't get all upset about so many little things. I just let it roll, because in the whole big picture, Jessica, it doesn't matter.
doesn't
So
matter.
that's what I really love the most, is that I'm really able to kind of be more present and live in the moment. And I love just, reminding people to do the same, and just don't sweat the small stuff, because most of it is small stuff.
It is. Well, thank you, Leslie. It was just my complete honor to share this time with you. I think what you're doing is beyond incredibly inspiring and important. And you're just a woman on a mission. And I just love that I'm connected with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. It's been just an honor to be here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Becoming Heartstrong. I hope you found today's episode inspiring and applicable to your life. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share it with a friend. Before I go, this is just a quick reminder that I believe in you, and I believe that you too have the ability to become heartstrong. I'll chat with you soon.